So my name is Yannick Rozo, and I will be hosting this Great River Rapport presentation. And before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that I am currently residing on the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee. As this is a virtual event, we may have individuals joining us from all over. And so I would invite you to check out native-land.ca to determine which lands or traditional territories you are inhabiting. If you have any questions or comments throughout the duration of the presentation today, please drop them in the Facebook comment section of this Facebook Live video, and we will get to them during the question and answer period, which will be around the last 15 minutes of our presentation today. I would also invite you to join where you're joining us from and your interest in this presentation. So we are excited to be joined today by Abraham Francis, who is the Program Manager of Environment at Mohawk Council of Akwesasne. Abraham has a Bachelor of Science in Microbiology and a Master's of Science in Natural Resources from Cornell University. He will be presenting today on the community-based participatory action approach taken with the Mohawk community of Akwesasne to develop approaches for engaging with new settled land claims, forested lands where the voices of Akwesasne community members were reflected. And of course, I will now pass it on to Abe. Thanks.
Yeah, well, Yannick, for that introduction, and Segoso everyone that's joined us tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk a bit about this. And what I was really thinking about was how best to present, these different methods that I used. And I think the best example is actually just presenting the chapter that I did on this. And so I'm really excited to share this work with y'all, and really grateful to all the people that made this possible, this work possible, my community, my family, my friends, everyone that has invested their time and their love into me. And so with that, I'm going to start sharing the presentation that I put together. And so let me hop right up on that. So the name of the chapter that I wrote about this was called Akwesasronon Voices Connecting Community and Forest Stewardship. And really what I was interested in is about how do I tell the stories and express that relationship that exists between my community and the forest? How do we develop recommendations that are meaningful to my people, to my community, that will really go after what we're looking at and are trying to fit into some framework that isn't our own? I often have heard, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And in my opinion, sometimes the wheel's broken. The wheel is actually a cinder block. And so why not create something new? Why not develop a new approach, something that works better? And specifically for Akwesasne, this is really important considering the uniqueness of our community. And so before I get going, I always love to share this story about Mary Tebow. And I was given permission from her family to share this story. And I really appreciate that they did let me have this opportunity. And when I look at her, I think of my own grandmother, my own family, and the lineage of strong Indigenous women from this community that made us so much of who we are and uplifted us. So what happened here, or what you're looking at, is just creating like a laundry basket out of black ash splints. And what I like to draw people's attention to is the joy on her face. And these baskets and the practice of basket making was something that is an example of resilience and resistance that is embedded within who we are as Akwesasronon. And so this woman was jailed 2 times for 90 days apiece because she refused to surrender her Canadian citizenship. And what it was she was refusing to recognize Canada as the United States. She's Akwesasronon. And so she didn't kowtow to the settler colonial governments in order to be who she is. And I heard stories about this. I even lived my life after this. Like very much like the ecology of this area, I have no respect for this border. And I choose not to live my life that way. Instead, I'm Akwesasronon, and I express that in everything I do. And so just to give you a little bit of context on the complexity of where Akwesasne is located and why it's so hard to develop recommendations for a community as diverse as our own, is that we are at the intersection of two provinces and one state. And this is a part of that complex history that we come from. And so, I have to deal with Quebec regulations, Ontario regulations, New York regulations, but I'll stop right there and I'll say I try not to deal with any of them, because what I'm interested in is how are we going to do things in an Akwesasronon way. And I'll take information from these different areas, but I'm really targeting how do we do this in our own way. And so the whole overarching question associated with this was, what are the relationships between Indigenous communities and forests? And that's oftentimes how I frame my questions and looking at that community-based research. What are the relationships? Because the relationships are at the foundation of everything that I do. And I'm looking at that intersection, that relational network that is between Indigenous communities and the forest. And for me, it existed for my people, and this baskets and this sweetgrass, these are all examples of the ways in which that was expressed. And particularly, I love this giant basket that was created in our community as part of a tourism initiative. And it incorporates so many different kinds of styles that are from our community, but it's a massive, massive basket. And it's so amazing that so many different basket makers actually contributed to this process. So basically, this is how I did this entire chapter. This is how I enacted community-based participatory action research. So what I did primarily was I situated the context of Akwesasne. And what a lot of people will sort of hear me say is context specificity. And I will talk more about what that means in Akwesasne. And I think a lot of people that listen to my talks are probably sick of me giving that part of the speech, but it's always important for me to hold on to that and carry that into the work I do, into the questions I ask, how I develop my methodologies, how I create flexible methodologies. And then what I did is I had to go through my school to get an IRB approval. And honestly, I would rather have gotten an approval from my community rather than my institution, but I digress on that piece, and I'm hoping to reestablish what it is in our community that is able to do that our own regulation around those things. And then I held that collaborative gathering, and this was just basically a focus group that brought together my community members, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later. And then I analyzed that, and that provided the foundation of what I then went into for individual semi-structured interviews. And so then what I did was I took all of the values and that information, and then I went and discussed it and integrated it into, went deeper into what these different values and sub-values meant. And then I used programs to analyze that information, and I'll share a bit about what that information was. I did a network analysis, and then it showed this complex connectivity amongst codes, and I interpreted that information, and then I turned it into recommendations for forest stewardship in Akwesasne. And what I sort of say this process as for me in this journey I went through this was Jinikole Hodo, or our ways. I developed my own way of being able to do community-based participatory action research that met my community's needs. And I did an analysis that centered on my connection to my community. And so everything that community-based participatory action research is about is sort of captured within the title of this talk. And really and it's all about asking a question that emerges from the community, and then working with the community to develop what it is that we're going to do about it. And it's also the action piece of it. This is not something that just sits on a shelf and collects dust. This is something that has to be lived and put into action. And I'm grateful that I have the position I have now, because I can actually do that. It's been so inspiring. And honestly, I'm trying to do new innovative research because I want to keep pushing the boundaries. And so I've been building on this work for quite some time now, and I'm really excited about where it's taken me. And so one of the pieces is the degradation of ecological relationships, the historical context, right? So when I was thinking about forests, I was like, okay, now where's the forest research, right? how is our relationship with forest captured within the literature and within our history? And so the only place it was sort of seen was within the potash industry and with agriculture in our community. And so because we're on reservations, we have a limited land base. And so that increases the pressure in which we have to cultivate and utilize the land in our community. And so that caused a lot of our forests in Akwesasne, they're not old growth forests. A lot of them are new. And so that was kind of where I was at. And then, when I was doing this work, people were like, well, what about the water? And, there's so much research about Akwesasne and our relationship with the water, with fish. And so what happened in 54 and 57 was the St. Lawrence Seaway project. And what this did was it changed the hydrology of our area. And as I sort of think about this too, changing the hydrology of this area also affected the ability of our black ash trees to be usable. Now that was a bit of knowledge that came out of the research I did, but honestly, just sitting here talking about it, yeah, that's part of that connection that happened with the forest. And so then with like the cheap energy and the seaway being in there through our community, was that industry came to our area. And so so then we got like heavy industrialization coming to our community. And unfortunately, that's what we had to deal with. And we've dealt with areas of concern both on the south and the north shore. And, that's connected to what happened with our relationship with forests and our relationships with creation in Akwesasne. And so the best example of that implication, like I said, was with water and fish. And so in the 70s, MCA put out a do not consume order. And then in the 86, the tribe put out their do not consume. And then between 98 and 2013, all this important health research went down. And a lot of it was really about the implications of PCBs, heavy metals on our bodies. Menarche in young women was affected. Testosterone in men was affected. Developmental issues. There were so many health implications. And for me, a lot of it revolves around PCBs and all these different chemicals that are in the environment. And so what ended sort of this culmination of some interesting research was, and some people may have heard about Elizabeth Hoover's work, and she did this really great ethnographic study on the community and really showed that relationship that was affected by these fish consumption guidelines, was affected by the pollution, and how our relationship with the land was disrupted and harmed. And I think that's part of the narrative that helps support our natural resources damages case settlement, which came up to $20.3 million. But what was really great about this settlement was actually we were able to allocate a portion of it towards our cultural restoration program called Azaji Dawado. Because it's not just about ecological restoration for an indigenous community, it's also about that cultural relationship restoration, which comes with education, comes with restoring the knowledge systems. And so it was a system, an educational system put in place that was teaching, it was bringing masters and mentors and mentees together to be able to develop those skills and reclaim them. And then there's like the political ecology of land claim in Akwesasne, and primarily I focused on the southern portion because I was the money that supported my research came through a partnership between Cornell and the St. Regis Mohawk tribe. I wanted to do the whole community, but it was not sort of recommended at that time. And I think if I did it again, I would have completely rejected that and looked more towards a holistic approach. But here we are. And so a bit of this was based on the boundaries that were set in the 1796 Seven Nations of Canada Treaty. And then in 1982, the land claim case started, like land claims case started. And now we're like 40 years in. And, what we went into is these memorandums of understanding. with the different counties in our community. And so there was one with Franklin County and there was one with St. Lawrence County. But in 2005, there was a failure of these settlement, or there was a failure in these agreements because there was a case, the land claims case of the Oneida Nation was basically canceled. And that was a dissenting agreement that was put forth by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, written by the Supreme Court Justice, and so they backed out. But in 2014, we were able to renegotiate. We went forward to St. Lawrence County, and we've been moving forward because we actually don't have to go about, negotiating with these counties. We have a mechanism provided to us called, move into trust, but these things take quite some time. And we were in 2014, we got 39 acres. In 2017, we got 1,100 acres. And in 2018, we got 240 acres. And reminding that a lot of money goes into this process and it takes quite a bit of time. And so we are constantly in this process where land that was stolen from us with 99-year leases, because recognize the fact that those 99-year leases, we weren't supposed to exist anymore. That the Indian termination, period of the United States was meant to, we weren't supposed to exist. We were supposed to just be assimilated into American society. And I think the same thing applies to Canada. And so I think it's ironic. I think it's terrible, but we're strong and we're going after everything that's been stolen from us. We have the lawyers, we have the researchers, we are becoming more and more capable at playing this game that was used against us for a very long time. And so, yeah, that's a bit about where we're at. Now, for the biocultural context, I talk a lot about the Ahantagalawadakwa, which is something that outlines our relational network with the creation around us. It embeds our roles and responsibilities. And then I draw on the Guyana Lagoa, which informs the ways that we build healthy relationships. And that's like on a personal level, at least from Henry Lickers' teachings with me, where, try to treat yourself with the teachings of the Guyana Lagoa, teach ones around you, and approach your relationships with other people from that place. And this is what established the Haudenosaunee Confederacy on 3 principles: Skana, Gasastasla, and Gatnigo Clio, which is peace, power, and a good mind. And so this applies to all our relationships, even with creation. And then I also draw on traditional teachings that speak to that relationship, our ontology, our epistemology, our axiology, and I love those words. I just think they sound pretty. But there's just sort of the academic ways of talking about this, and specifically our ontology being connected to this landscape through the creation story, which how we became here. And then, looking at the clan story about how we are a part of this landscape and reflected in it. And then our cycle of ceremonies, the annual reminder of our roles and responsibilities to creation. I really love that Henry Lickers talked about it, was we have ceremonies because we messed up. And this is that reminder that we gotta keep doing this relationship. We gotta keep reminding ourselves on an annual basis. And these are informed by these phenological indicators. And so they happen when certain things bud, or like maple runs, or the soil is warm enough to plant, or flower blooms. There's certain ways that we signify it's time for these ceremonies. And so this is one of the ways in which I did. So I did all that research. I put all that context specificity business together. And then what I did was I held my first collaborative gathering. And I'm really proud of this, the amount of people I was able to invite and make participate in this, but also the way that I was able to pull it off. I've been trying to invite people for a long time. And I got panicked as it was approaching. And I just remember calling my mom and just being like, I'm going to cancel it. I'm dropping out of grad school. I'm done. I'm over this. And then we just got on the phone and we started calling everybody. And she called people. And then her people called people. And then all my people showed up in this room at the Akwesasne Housing Authority. And what was so beautiful about this, that we had representatives from the tribe, from MCA, We had both longhouses represented in this place. We just had such a diverse set of people present here. And I had my professors present, which is Dr. Karim Ali Kassam and Dr. Angela Fuller. And what was really cool about this was actually I had my mom there, and she was doing in the moment translations for me. So if I had a question that was kind of complicated, she would translate it for me so that people could understand. Because sometimes the way we ask questions may not necessarily really connect well. Like in particular, this was most made aware to me when the ways I was trying to ask questions of my grandmother and her sister back in those days. And so I was really just trying to get people's insight about what are Akwesasnonon values as they relate to forests. And we took a whole day, we had food, I gave out tobacco ties, I presented my professors. And one of the most interesting pieces of this is just the reminder that I was able to pull this off because of my connection to this community. That people took the time to show up to this and invest in me because they love me and they care for me and they want to see me succeed. And that I've built so many relationships across this community in order to be able to make something like this possible. And then also like my mom's relationships became important to this as well, and her connections across the community. And then my friends and other people were important members of this. And it really grew out of who I am as Abraham Thomas Francis, as son of Salonia Francis and Galilee Hearn, that was able to make this possible. And so I just drew on all of that energy. And so when I think about community-based participatory action research in Indigenous community, the best person to do it is a person from that community. And it's not that like non-Indigenous folks can't do this research. It's just that you're entering the game at a huge disadvantage. And what this invites into, and really an important moment that was shared with me here, was one of the members here spoke to my mom and said, tell Abe to come talk to me after, because I don't want to tell him things while white people are in the room. And I thought that was hilarious, but also to me spoke to the privacy of our community, that there's a difference between public and community knowledge. But also recognizing the fact that there's also privacy within our community. There's certain knowledge that I can't have access to, but that's okay. But it's also okay that like people that are from here aren't going to have access to information that they can't. But there's a barrier. And I want to respect that. And that's why, when I've been having these climate change talks over the past couple of weeks, it's been focused on Akwesasnonon only. It's not to be exclusionary. It's just that like Akwesasnonon people share things when it's just us. We joke, we laugh, we share ridiculousness. And that's what I think is a really important part of this. And so that was all embedded within this collaborative gathering. And then from there, I took individual interviews. And what I developed was what I like to call a fuzzy cognitive map. Now, I'm probably using that term incorrectly, but it's more like a pseudo fuzzy cognitive map. But what it really was about was sort of putting these values that I sequestered from the individual interviews and just blowing them up and making a visual representation. Because I wrote, I think it was about 3 or 4 pages of values and definitions. And I recognize that people ain't gonna sit there and read that. Not everybody. Peggy Pike Thompson, now she read it and she had a lot to say, but not everybody wanted to do that. Instead, they really were just inspired by seeing these values represented on there and wanted to talk about it. And so I interviewed 37 people, 14 males, 23 females, and the ages ranged from 25 to 88. And I asked 3 main questions. How do Akwesasnonon see their relationship to forest? And, how do Akwesasnonon conceptualize forest stewardship? And then when I thought about the person I was interviewing and through the process we went through, I'd asked them a little surprise question at the end, based off who they are, how they're related to the community, and then just interrogate a little bit deeper. And I got such beautiful, beautiful interviews out of this. And so here we are transcribing. I hated it. It was the worst thing I've ever done. If anybody wants me to transcribe anything, you can ask somebody else, because I hate that nonsense. And so once I had everything transcribed, I had to code it. And so this is a way that I coded my stuff. I utilized this technique that was developed by Saldana, or not Saldana, but like I got it from this book, from qualitative studies and different approaches. And I use thematic coding. A thematic code is an extended phrase or sentence that identifies what a unit of data is about and or what it means. And then a subcode, a second order tag assigned after a primary code to detail or enrich the data, the entry. And so this is where I had this whole complex coding system down with highlighters and tabs, and it was really inspired by this chapter I read, which was like, you'll get more out of what you're looking at by just being with it with a pen and paper, and then translating that to a digital platform through Atlas TI. And so just a quick moment of acknowledgement was I had these codes that were developed, and you see here this line here: passing on knowledge, source of knowledge, concerns, holistic health, stewardship, medicine, diversity, spirit, gender roles, suppression of knowledge. Those were the thematic codes that I ended up getting. Now, it was mostly because I was going to apply this framework of values that I had found in a paper, but it wasn't working. It was just too many codes in one area, and one was filling up. It was just messy. And so I didn't like it. And so we came up with this new approach. And this is what we ended up kind of coming to here. And, you may see that like passing on knowledge was where the most codes were, but all of these, this is no indication of value. Each one of these could have been deeply could have been their own chapters, could have been their own thesis. And so that's where I think there's this really beautiful aspect of it. But also there was a lot of codes with them. So I have to look into these more deeply. And so I looked more deeply into passing on knowledge. And what came out of that is stories and like what education looked like, knowledge providers, practical knowledge, resurgence and teachings. And I expressed what these meant within my thesis. And so like really story being really important, like the way that we communicate, we tell stories, we're an oral tradition people, we're trying to tell how we connect. And that's where I often went back to. And then I thought about sources of knowledge and different ways that I connected with that. And there was this complex connectivity part of it, which for me was kind of like the result of like, there was things that were too condensed values wise. And so I called them complex connectivity. And then also like, there's this like connection to land aspect of it. And then there's the roles and responsibilities, which I talk a lot about with the with Akwa, and then ceremony. These are the ways that we have knowledge connected to these landscapes. And this is the way that the knowledge emerges from our connection to this place. And then I looked into the species. There was over 100, I want to say like, I can't remember exactly right now, but there was like 140 unique number of species that were mentioned by community members in these interviews. And the main ones that were sort of talked about, and makes sense because we were talking about forests, were black ash, sugar maple, cedar, and white pine. And there's a lot of stories about these and just why they're such a part of us. And then I became really frustrated by, this was inspired by engagement with folks throughout the process as well. Like, remember, this is a reflexive process. And so what I used to hear a lot of is it's all important. But what I struggle with is when we say everything is important, then nothing is important, right? And it's all connected. But like, how am I supposed to do research on something if everything is so connected? And so what I came up with is this idea of I kind of took all my relations and looked at it from this complex connectivity perspective. And the way that my advisor talked about this was the role of our cultural and social processes as conceptually independent but mutually interdependent yields interesting insights into the complex connectivity that comprise relations with biological foundations. Basically, we're really close with the land. And this is the map that got created out of that expression, a lot of values. You're not supposed to be able to read it, just so you know. just because it just kind of it's an example of how complexly related these things are. And what you can see is like how species feeds into complex connectivity, into story, and then this like roundabout way. And there's a lot of values in that way that you can connect like that. And so then, just for ease of looking at these things, an example of this is species, right? The complex connectivity of species. And there was 22 nodal connections. So the way species connected with values was like this. And then there was 1,150 intersections. Now, what I really like to mention is like the deep connection between species and stories and practical knowledge. And so what I want you to hold on to is when a species is lost, that story is affected, that practical knowledge is no longer available to us. This can really disrupt our relationship with the land, and it has. And then thinking about the complex connectivity of passing on knowledge, stories. There were 19. And what I thought was really cool was like, in my interviews, oftentimes people referenced a lot of the same people. So we have these people that are sort of like these individuals we go to for our traditional knowledge, and we know who they are across the community. And so these are the experts that we reference. And what I heard was like a lot of this knowledge used to be more widespread in our community, but now it's sort of more centralized in different individuals because colonialism affected us a lot. And we're in this period of reclamation. And then sort of next one I like to talk about is source of knowledge, which had 12 different connections and this complex connectivity, which you can kind of start seeing the unpacking of here. And what was really interesting here is about the story connection and the species connecting, but also the loss. And this sort of connects to the first one I was talking about, that our loss, losing a species, losing that relationship. When we put an intervention in place, we have to consider the implications on this network. And it's not just about environmental restoration, it's about a restoration, healing, and mending that relationship between my people and the land. And that, in my mind, and my hypothesis is that if we restore the relationship between people and the land, that we will see improved community health endpoints, as well as ecological health endpoints. And it's through this relationship that we will see improvements. It's long-term work, it's hypothesis, but it's what I believe in, and I'm looking to do this work with my life and keep seeking this out because I believe in this. And so one of my recommendations came up was set aside accessible forested lands, community engagement, collaborations, addressing people's concerns, and curriculum development. And this is what I do with my work now. I've embedded setting aside accessible forested lands and embedded that within a mapping project I'm doing with Thousand Islands National Park. My community engagement, that's what I'm all about. Like, let's get in the community, let's show up, let's talk to people. I miss that, and COVID has disrupted that so much, and we can see it in our community. And then for my collaborations, I approach them from the teachings of the true row, thinking about the ship and the boat, building a relation of peace, of peace, power, and a good mind between us, like respecting each other's autonomy. But also I'm trying to develop these mixed methodologies between us. I'm trying to develop what I like to call ropes of co-creation. And that's that connective tissue between us that we can support each other. But that's a whole separate conversation, and a lot of theory and thought goes into that one. And then from addressing the current concerns, a lot of concerns were revolved around the loss of our cultural connections, a loss of our knowledge, a loss of who we are as Akwesasronon, as Indigenous people. And look, we have residential schools and assimilationist tactics and day schools, and even society in general was forcing us into this box that didn't fit for us. And so we're trying to reclaim that. And what I like to call it is trying to ignite a remembering. And with the curriculum development, one of my favorite phrases is called Indigenous people have a different epistemological orientation. And what that is, it's just a fancy way of saying we learn different. And so it's developing approaches because in a different life and in a different time, I was really looking like there's this issue with communicating science, and some people can easily cross that boundary, but some people it's a very violent experience, and so they reject it. And so developing curriculum that's grounded in our relationships and our understandings with creation, I think we'll have better retention. And one of the ways I sort of seen that done was by Chief Beverly, oh my God, Cook. Yes, Chief Beverly Cook from the St. Regis Mohawk tribe. And she gives this talk about the ways that Sky Woman is connected to menstruation, to creation. And I thought it was so beautiful because I spent years in biology courses and I learned this process over and over again in various different iterations. But when she talked about it, I could see it happening and I just never forgot it. I never forgot it. And so I'm like, really, I want to pursue this. I want to push this forward. And I've been able to get project funded in order to pursue this. So again, this is me taking these ideas and just kicking them through the door and pushing them forward. And so, like, in conclusion, what I was sort of saying was, and that we're engaging hope, that we can restore the land, we can store our relationship, we can restore our knowledge, our language, we can call all of those things home. And I love this example that I have from Carrie Hill, who's a basket maker in our community. And she received this basket on the bottom left. It was damaged. It was sad looking, and she was able to restore it. And I think a lot about this, and that we will restore our relationship and that we will call home. And so that, like, forest stewardship is just one of those mechanisms in which we can fulfill our roles and responsibilities to creation. And with that, again, I'm really grateful to the people that made this possible. And so now it's a good time if you have any questions for me.
Excellent. Thanks, Abe. Yes, so we'll take questions now. So if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comment section on Facebook, on the Facebook Live video, and we will get to them. Okay. I'm just looking here. We don't have a question quite yet. I have one for you, Abe.
Yes.
So how did you come up with the 3 questions for your for the individual interviews?
Well, they took a couple of different iterations too. Like I have, like, there wasn't actually just those questions. Like, those are just sort of a watered down version of what I actually asked. So when I did the individual interviews, those were probably closer to the questions that I asked of people during there. And I was asking them, well, what do forests mean to us? I was asking, like, do we have traditional stories? What do we do for forest stewardship? Things like that. And so I asked a variety of questions, and then I took that information. And what I did was I was like, what does forest stewardship mean to you? And then I would show people this, and I was like, do you have any advice on how we could improve these values or expand on them? And then I'd ask them about, like, what is our connection? What do forests mean to you? And then also, like, this sort of, like, last piece with this, like, how do we express this in our community? And also it's just this, like, kind of like just this last question about, like, okay, well, you are a chief, right? Like just thinking about, like, the person I might have been interviewing. You're a chief. You're an older man or something, and what is it that you relate to the land? How do you see forest stewardship coming into being? How can you help that? And so I would just listen to their stories, and it was really beautiful to sit there, because sometimes it was like these, like, really traditional stories, some of which I didn't share, like I enacted the method of no by Audra Simpson, which I love. Because some of this knowledge is none of academia's business. So I didn't share it. And then, yeah. And a lot of it just emerged through the process. I came up with the questions. with my professor at first, and then I adjusted them as I noticed things weren't working, or maybe we weren't connecting in a certain way, and I even translated them into Mohawk, which was quite a journey. It was fun, like it wasn't some kind of like, it wasn't like I went into like deep theory around how to ask a question. Like there's really interesting ways that like qualitative research can get really in depth, like how many times somebody says or when they pause, or how their body shifts, and that you can really read into those. And I was like, no, I'm gonna do this way. So it could have come out in different ways, but yeah, a lot of it was just like trying to get people to talk to me, trying to draw those stories out, trying to get people excited. Because sometimes I've noticed like it's a really emotional time, like sharing stories. I've laughed my face off till I've cried, and I've cried with people in these things. And there was even one interview I couldn't open and I couldn't analyze because it just hurt too much. And that's like, just kind of following myself as a part of this community, as somebody that's part of this knowledge system, as a generative source of it, that, sometimes I had to respect that medicine and I had to walk away from it, and that things came out when it was time. What I remember from like my graduate education was I got really, really depressed. I was away from home. I was just dealing with some thought, like a lot of things. And it's funny to me because after I like finally analyzed all my interviews and stuff, the tools I needed to get through that time were actually in my interviews, which I thought was hilarious. Like, I was depressed and I was like, the one thing I needed to do was just go to the forest. And I know it sounds simple and there was more to it, but that was part of it. Like this was emotional, like a piece of my heart was laid on this page. And I struggled with the idea of, am I sharing too much? Am I not sharing enough? Is like, am I even good enough to do this? And look, like I still struggle with those things. But yeah, so it was a really emotional journey, and the questions were an expression of that. And just being able to draw out of people their stories and that passion and that who they are and their emotion. Like it was all about that.
Okay, wow, fantastic answer. Thanks, Abe. Thanks for sharing that. That's great. I'm going to look quickly and just see if there's any other questions. Oh, okay. Someone said, so there's a lot of comments, just saying thank you for the work that you're doing. It's fantastic. Someone has asked, how long did this process take? How long did this process take you to start and finish, from start to finish?
3 years. So I started, and look, like a lot of this too is like a part of my journey. Like it will take me, like I'm doing a similar thing with climate change right now. And it's not going to take me as long. One, because I have people that are helping me transcribe. And two, I've gone through this journey of decolonizing my mind and my understanding of these things and trusting the knowledge of my people. When I went into graduate school, I wanted to do a purely quantitative research study. I wanted to appeal to the colonial system to give me the validation I needed for my work to be to be respected, And I was like, I'm not gonna get caught up in all that spiritual mumbo jumbo. We're all about, what's our p-value, and what kind of weight system are we using? What's the geospatial analysis? And I ended up rejecting a lot of those things, and a journey with myself and my emotions. And I still treat my research that way. That sometimes things don't happen until it's time. I haven't met the right person. Those thoughts aren't where they need to be yet. I still need to have more conversations. And I often think about like how stunted a lot of this is because of COVID. Because I used to just go visit my medicine people. I used to go visit people. I used to go share tea and coffee with folks. And I haven't for a long time. And I wonder how like long it's going to take us, even when COVID business is done, to reclaim that. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. I think going forward, we'll make sure that you get a transcriber so that you're not stuck doing it anymore. So someone has said, thank you for your work. I am interested in how you coded the results. Do you find it difficult to be true to Indigenous ways of knowing and satisfy traditional scientific ways of looking at data?
Hmm. I mean, look, like the thing was this was an approach that like I felt was appropriate, and I don't think it was perfect. Um, and I'm still figuring out how best to do this in the future. In particular, what I think really made my analysis better. I mean, like for me and for this process is being part of this community. Like the diversity of understanding that I represent and that I've cultivated across my life. Like my family and who I am is well connected across this community and a diverse set of groups that, like with my grandmother represented like the Catholic Church for me. We grew up there. And then, the relationship I built with Ohologo was how I built a relationship with one longhouse. And then with the other longhouse, it was a clan mother and a chief that sat me down over Trek sub and taught me about the Great Law, and that was in high school, and I drew on that relationship. And then working at a cigarette factory, I worked in a bar, I've worked all over the place. I've done a lot of weird things in my life, but I've cultivated a relationship everywhere I went. And I draw on those relationships when I need them. And I think that what I often go back to is everyone has value. Their stories have value, and we all have a place here. And so it's important that we try to be as broad sweeping with the ways in which we bring in people's thoughts. And I'm not perfect at this. I often get like imposter syndrome even talking about my people's traditional knowledge. Like I ain't got no business having an opinion on some of these things. I'm not tradition enough in order to speak on them. But what I have is the people that cultivated my thought, and I have my own thoughts. Like I'm a generative part of this system, and I think sometimes it's weird for me. It's hard. It's just hard. Like I went through a weird period. Like I'm somebody that identifies as two spirit. And at a time when I was growing up, or when I even started, like when I first came out and was in the community, I felt like I didn't have a place. I had medicine people tell me I didn't exist and that something was wrong with me. And I had to open that dialogue. I had to talk about it. I had to go to other communities to learn about their two spirit people. I've just been blessed with friendships and family from all over the place that have cultivated thought in me, and, recognize the mentorship I received from Carol Warrior and Shawano Uran and other Indigenous academics out there that just inspired me to do things differently and me remain attentive and accountable to my community. And that it was this work that's allowed me to bring the environment program where it is now. And I'm not going to stop. I'm going to keep growing. I'm going to create that stability and keep that work moving. So when I think about knowledge in my community, coming back to like the main part of this question, and yeah, I'm very long-winded in my question answering, but I'm a part of this system, and I have to recognize that and that sit in that power, and that I am going to make mistakes. I'm gonna get yelled at. I've been yelled at by people. I'm not afraid. Like, I've been called down. I've been, and I've been humbled plenty of times. But what I recognize is that our knowledge and our communities are diverse. They're shifting, they're growing, they're changing. And I'm just going with that flow and seeing where it takes me. And for me, like when I learn something, I then carry that responsibility to understand the privacy that comes with certain bits of knowledge. Like there's certain traditional knowledge around medicines that I don't share. There's certain stories that don't get shared beyond my community. And, regardless if somebody else will share that, I have certain things that I won't share, things that make me uncomfortable. I try to listen to myself in those situations and say, yes, no, I'm not appropriate. I should connect with this person to figure out what they have to say about it. And so a lot of it's been a journey for me, and just knowing that, like, if I want this knowledge to continue in my community, to my kids, my grandkids, to future generations, then I have to seek it out and I have to claim it. And then I carry the responsibility to pass it on to them, but also protect it. And so, this enters into all my conversations. And I'm definitely sitting in a different place now. Before, when I was in academia, I wasn't in a place of where I am now. So I have a lot more, I don't know if it's respect or authority or what. Um, it was different. The power dynamics were different. Where I sit and what I do at MCA, regardless of how I see power hierarchies being implemented, I know that the government tries to approach me, and when I say no to things, they listen. And academics listen to me when I say no. And before, it was like I had to do Indigenous 101 all the time. That my understanding as an Akwesasronon, somebody that was born and raised here, was called into question pretty regularly. Well, how do you know that? I lived it. I grew up in it. I was shaped by it. Like, this is my life and my experience. And I'm a messy person. Like, I've done a lot of weird things all across my community, and it's all a part of my work. Like, I'm a part of it. So I guess that's my way. Is There's a spiritual dimension to this, and remaining connected to myself, my spirit, and believing that, like, I'm just doing the best I can. And you know what? If I'm doing something wrong, trust me, somebody will call me out and shut my ass down. Okay. Like, my people are not like exactly like the little timid kind that are gonna just be like, oh no, you shouldn't do that. No, they'll let me know. Trust me.
Awesome. Thanks, Abe. There's a few more questions. So someone has asked, hi, Abe, always great to hear your thought leadership. My question, can non-Indigenous communities participate somehow as part of a mutual healing process with the land and each other?
Yeah. A great example of that is the Healing Place, which is this Truth and Reconciliation forest planting. You should look it up. It's in Shanley, Ontario. Been doing a lot of work around that. And the whole idea around it is that reconciliation, which I don't believe in, to be honest, is all about like mending the relationship between Indigenous people and Canadians. And for me, it's not just about that. It's about mending the relationship with the land as well. And so we developed this space that's all about that, that's committed to that, committed to storytelling, knowledge sharing, ceremony, joy, laughter, healing. And like, that's for me an example of where I've sort of been able to express that very concept, and hope to do more of that work in the future.
Perfect, thanks. There is another question. Bringing your personal struggles and views into the discussion really enforces, oh, sorry, this is not a question. This is, so a lot of people saying thank you, lots of really nice feedback.
Thanks, guys.
Really, yeah. Go check it out after. It's really nice. All right. I'll just scroll one more time to see if there are any more questions. Okay, that might be the last question. So I'll just quick reminder, anyone, if there's anything else you would like to ask, a few more minutes left. Otherwise, we can close it up for the night if you'd like. So,
I'm okay with that.
yeah, let you get back to to resting. Well deserved. Yeah. All right, I think that's it then, Abe, for the night. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. It's been great having you for this presentation, Abe. And this workshop will be posted on the River Institute YouTube with all of our other presentations and workshops. And so if anyone would like to rewatch it, you're welcome to find it there at riverrapport.ca/workshops, where the YouTube link will be posted, and we'll also post it to our Facebook page. So yeah, thanks so much everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time.